Firstly, just want to check that you can hear me okay. If you can give a thumbs up, that would be great. Super, thanks so much, everybody. So first of all, I'll just introduce myself. So my name's Sarah Larragy, and I've just recently started as Programme Manager of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan in the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And I suppose the Pollinator Plan is an initiative that's been really close to my heart for quite some time throughout my studies and my research. So just to say that it's very much a pinch me moment to be joining the Biodiversity Data Centre team and the Pollinator team. And I'm really excited to be talking to you all today about the ambitious next phase of the plan. So just to give a quick overview of what I'll be chatting to you about today. So I thought I would first start from the beginning and remind you all about the very important insects at the core of this plan. I'll then outline what exactly the Pollinator Plan is and how it's progressed to date. I'll then get stuck into what's new in the new phase of the plan, so phase 3 of the plan, and hopefully you'll see how we plan to kick things up a notch. And finally, you can see how you can get involved. So to answer the question, what is a pollinator, we have to first look at plants. And plants, like any other organism, need to reproduce. And to do this, most plants will need pollen to be transferred from the male anther of one flower to the female stigma of another flower. And this is quite tricky if you're a plant and you can't walk around. So they've evolved a strategy with animals. So they have evolved to have animals do this for them. And they employ all sorts of advertisements and attractants to lure in animals to do this for them. And they usually offer a reward like pollen or nectar for the animals. So when animals like bees visit these flowers in search of pollen and nectar, they can actually inadvertently transport this pollen between flowers. And it's this movement of pollen that allows plants to reproduce and form seeds, sometimes encased in fruits, which will, with luck, turn into new plants. So why do we need pollinators? Pollinators contribute to the provision of what are called ecosystem services. And this is just a term used to describe all of the benefits that nature provides to us humans. So it's the diversity of pollinators, all of the different species of bees, of flies, of moths, and so on, all the shapes and sizes they come in that help deliver these critical services. So first and foremost, they contribute to food production. So they contribute to the pollination of food crops, especially those that produce foods and seeds that we then consume. And actually 75% of the world's top food crops are dependent on animal pollination to some degree. Animal pollination has also been shown to improve often the quality and the shelf life of certain fruits, and can even contribute to a higher nutrient value in some of these. I always like to point out at this point that the things that often make life worth living, like tea, coffee, and chocolate, are also derived from animal pollinated plants. So animal pollination provides us with that choice, that diversity in our diet, that gives us that nutritional value. And pollinators, of course, also contribute hugely to wild plant pollination. And 87.5% of all flowering plant species depend to some degree on animal pollination. And this is really important because plants and pollinators alike are vital for these ecosystems to function in a healthy manner and to carry out the processes that we need them to, like waste recycling, pest control, and feeding other animals from birds to cattle. And all of these then in turn have wider benefits for us. Healthy ecosystems contribute to better climate regulation. They contribute to the formation and maintenance of healthy soil. They help reduce flood risk. And really importantly as well, they contribute to our culture and our heritage and our general well-being. So who are our pollinators? So of course, bees are one of the most important groups of pollinators. So bees throughout each stage of their life cycle, so from when they're larvae to when they're adult bees out foraging on flowers, they depend on pollen and nectar, which they get from flowers. And one species that is particularly loved and well known by humans is the honeybee. And these are a social species, so they form huge colonies, they have a queen and are primarily then made up of worker bees, which are the foraging force of the colony. And this species, we just have one species in Ireland, and they're mainly managed by beekeepers, although there are some free living colonies as well. and a native genotype has also been rediscovered within the last 10 years, which is of conservation interest. But generally, as a whole, bees are not the wild bees that are in decline in Ireland. So it's the bumblebees and solitary bees, as well as many other pollinating insects, that are the pollinators we're worried about and are showing declines. So bumblebees are a particular favourite of mine. They often have large furry bodies, often adapted or better able to cope with cooler and windier conditions. And they're also social bees. So they nest in or on the ground, often in old rodent burrows or in long grass, particularly at the base of hedgerows. And these colonies of bumblebees, they don't make great stores of honey like honeybees do. So they're only really ever a few days away from starvation. And you might be surprised to hear that most of the bee species in Ireland actually don't form colonies. They're solitary bees. And the females, so it's just the females that we have that make nests of their own. They don't have any worker bees or anything like that. And most of our solitary bee species will make nests in little burrows in the ground. And we do have some species as well that are cavity nesters, so they can opt for hollowed out stems or old stone walls. And there is even a species that has the particularly niche lifestyle of nesting in empty snail shells. And they're a really lovely and diverse group of insects. An important thing to note here is that a female solitary bee will only travel about 200 meters, rarely more than that, from her nest to collect resources. And this is something that will become important later on. And it's not just bees we have that are important pollinators, we also have hoverflies. So we have about 180 species of hoverfly, and they also forage on from flowers for nectar and pollen. And they often resemble bees and wasps with varying effect. This is a strategy they employ to try and fool predators into thinking they can sting them. So they often have these high contrast black and yellow patterns. And this is a particularly funny example because it actually is called the Batman hoverfly, and it has this pattern on its thorax that resembles the bat signal. But in addition to pollinating plants and looking very cool, some species in their larval form are voracious predators of crop pests like aphids. So they do provide a suite of services that are of benefit to humans. We also have moths, and so we have about 1,500 species of moths in Ireland. The adults primarily feed on nectar, so they just have this long proboscis that fits into flowers and sucks up nectar from them. And they're really important nocturnal pollinators. So it's been shown by research that they visit a wide diversity of plants at nighttime that might not normally be visited or might be missed by daytime pollinators. And there's also many other insects that do some small amounts of pollination, like butterflies, beetles, wasps, and ants. So while they might frequently visit flowers, they don't often successfully pollinate those flowers, but they are still important. So the bad news is that pollinators are in decline. So bees, hoverflies, moths, and butterflies have all undergone declines. And there's some figures here. So we have over half of our bee species have undergone substantial declines since 1980. And about 1/3 of our 102 wild bee species in Ireland are currently threatened with extinction. And it's been found that the key drivers of these declines are habitat loss, fragmentation, pesticide use, climate change, and disease spread. So it's an issue of hunger, of homelessness, and of lack of safety, which sounds quite damning, but it also quite clearly spells out what the solution is. And this is exactly what these two wonderful people thought when faced with the data showing the loss of our pollinators. So both experts in pollinator ecology, Dr. Una Fitzpatrick, who is our Chief Scientific Officer in the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and Professor Jane Stout, who is Professor of Ecology and VP for Biodiversity and Climate Action in Trinity College Dublin. And when faced with these declines, they put their heads together and co-founded what was the first All-Ireland Pollinator Plan in 2015. And this plan had a vision to bring together all sectors across both jurisdictions in Ireland to reverse the decline of pollinators. The delivery of this plan has been implemented by the National Biodiversity Data Centre ever since, and has been shaped by an island-wide steering group from the get-go. And they do say never meet your heroes, but I do have to say I'm very grateful I get to work with these ladies. And I should say as well that when they put the plan together, they actually had no idea it was going to be as widely adopted and as successful as it has been. So I suppose I should probably tell you about what the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan actually is. And the key vision of the plan is to create an island where pollinators can survive and thrive. It's founded on the principle that everyone has a role to play. The plan itself is a framework that is essentially a call to action that brings everyone together across sectors, from gardens to businesses, to farms, to local councils, communities, and many more. And one of the aims of the implementation of the plan is to engage, inspire, and empower people across the island to take actions to support pollinators and ultimately reverse their decline. So what have we done so far? We have 2 successful phases of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan under our belt. So the first one, as I mentioned, kicked off in 2015. It had 81 actions and just 1 project officer. The second phase, which was from 2021 to 2025, had 186 actions and 3 project officers. And so by the end of 2025, it was clear that these plans have been progressing very, very successfully. We had huge public support for pollinators, as was shown in a nationally representative poll at the end of 2025. So 67% of the public in the survey said that they were interested in learning about the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, and 84% of them felt that the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan was needed for 2026 to 2030. By the end of 2025, we also had over 200 local community groups involved in the plan, 400 business supporters. We had all 42 councils as partners of the plan. The number of people recording wild bees and submitting records was up by 300%. And we had over 5,000 sites logged as pollinator friendly. So these are sites where people are taking actions for pollinators. So those are the figures, but to actually hear about the stories, please check out our resource called 100 Tales of Hope. This outlines 100 stories from the second phase of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. So it's really worth checking out. And so what have we learned from these 2 phases? And many of our learnings are quite positive. So we've learned that people really do care about pollinators. We've also learned how important providing accessible evidence-based guidance on low-cost practical actions for all sectors is. We also know that everyone has a role to play, and we've seen that in everyone coming together and taking actions for pollinators, we are seeing a difference. We also note that partnerships among and between sectors are vital in linking up actions that are being taken and in sharing knowledge. But the key takeaway is that we still need to do more, and in particular, we need to do more joining up. And a key question that you might be asking is the plan actually working? And the problem with insect data is that it can vary widely from year to year. And it's really important that you have standardized, widespread, long-term data collection collected in a scientifically robust way to be able to say anything for sure. So we're still quite early on that journey, but we do have about 13 years worth of data from our bumblebee monitoring scheme, which is a citizen science monitoring scheme. And these data, they show that bumblebees, while they're still in decline, the declines in the last 5 years seem to have stabilized. So we still have to see how this goes, but this is a positive sign. There are several species, including common species, that are still in decline, but there are some positive responses on local scale after an action has been taken. So local populations of pollinators are responding to local actions. And just to be very clear, we're not satisfied with just stopping the decline or reducing the rate of decline. Our goal remains to reverse this decline, so to really push this trend up and start seeing an increase in abundance and diversity in pollinators across the island of Ireland. So the answer to is it working is yes, a cautious yes, but we still have a lot more to do to make this change positive and long lasting. And as we prepare to launch, or as we prepare to go into the next phase of the pollinator plan, it's worth stepping back and looking at the policy developments that have created momentum for pollinator conservation. So a major shift since the previous pollinator plan is the adoption of the EU Nature Restore Regulation. And Article 10 within this establishes a legally binding requirement to reverse pollinator decline by 2030. And then after this, to achieve increasing pollinator populations. And then in Northern Ireland, the Environmental Improvement Plan provides a long-term framework for environmental recovery. And one of its core objectives is to achieve thriving, resilient, and connected wildlife populations. So what does this actually mean for the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, and where does the Pollinator Plan fit into this? So the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan is the key mechanism for delivering, coordinating, and reporting on pollinator recovery across both jurisdictions on the island of Ireland. So we will be contributing to stopping the decline of pollinator populations by 2030 and to get their numbers increasing again. And it's important to note that there's a focus on increasing the diversity as well as the abundance of our pollinators. In order to do this, though, of course, we have to create and restore habitats across the landscape so that these pollinator populations can be supported and have enough food, shelter, and places to nest. We also will be contributing to the evidence base. So we will be working on standardized monitoring of pollinators, including rare species, and reporting on this progress. And it's these data that will hopefully show that our plan is working and our actions are making a difference. And just a quick note as well. So at the end of December, or in December 2024, we began a public consultation process about the next phase of the plan. And this consultation process included all sectors, including current partners, key stakeholder groups across both jurisdictions. We also conducted a public survey from early January to June 2025. And the key reason behind this consultation was to find out what people wanted from the next phase of the plan. And what we found was that there was strong support for moving towards a structure with different work packages coming together to form a coherent plan. So the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan 2026 to 2030 has been launched, and its overall vision is to create an island with pockets of nature every 200 metres. So you may have remembered me earlier saying that a solitary bee female rarely goes beyond 200 metres to find flowering resources to feed her larvae back at her nest. So imagine an island that has pockets of nature every 200 metres. This is the vision of the next phase of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. The funding for this next phase was granted at the end of 2025. So we put together a proposal for a more ambitious pollinator plan, delivering actions across 10 work packages, and submitted this to the Government of Ireland's Shared Island Initiative. And this was successful. So this next phase is supported through funding from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, the Government of Ireland's Shared Island Fund, and the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. And we celebrated the official launch of the plan on the 9th of July in the National Botanic Gardens in Glasnevin. And it was launched by Ministers Andrew Muir and Christopher O'Sullivan. It was a fantastic day where we had partners, funders, members of the community who've supported the plan to date, and celebrate the launch of the next phase. And just to say that this is our current steering group, which will meet annually to discuss the direction of the pollinator plan over the next 5 years. So we have a representative from each of these organisations, as well as a standalone honeybee steering group. So the next phase, as I said, of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan has 10 work packages. Within these are 50 strategic aims, as well as 75 success metrics, which we will report on annually. And the entirety of this plan builds on the lessons of the last 10 years. We're moving now away from, while we'll still be conducting engagement, we're moving from awareness raising to making a difference in practice and on the ground, and creating connections between all of our participants and supporters. On publication, it was supported by 130 partners, of which 32 are new organisations. So here they all are. So we have about 130 partners currently. And in the new plan, it's structured in a more flexible way so that new partners can join at any time over the next 5 years. So partners within the plan have agreed to support the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, as well as agreeing to collectively take over 280 actions for pollinators over the next 5 years. And they will report on these annually for the duration of the plan. We're really happy to say that we have increased capacity and an expanded team at the data centre to support the delivery and implementation of the Pollinator Plan. So myself, I only started about 2 months ago as Programme Manager of the new plan. And we also have Kate Chandler and Sarah Kelly, who are both funded by the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And so Kate is our Communities Pollinator Officer and Sarah Kelly is our Business and Biodiversity Officer. We also have 2 positions that are funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. So these are 2 farmland pollinator officer roles, and these are Patrick Doran and Pat Fitzmaurice. Funded then by the Shared Island Initiative, which includes the National Parks and Wildlife Service and Northern Ireland Environment Agency. We have Emma King, who is our Local Authorities and Public Bodies Pollinator Officer, Joshua Clark, our Rare Species Pollinator Officer, and John Ryder, our Pollinator Monitoring Research Assistant, who's based in Northern Ireland Environment Agency. And just to say, don't worry, Una's not going anywhere. She still maintains strategic oversight of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan to ensure that it integrates with the wider work on pollinator monitoring within the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And she's also the chair on the island-wide Pollinator Plan Steering Group. So to give an overview of the structure of the plan in hopefully a clearer way, we have 6 core work packages. So these specifically direct aims at specific sectors. So we have protecting farmland pollinators, local authorities and public bodies, transport authorities and utility companies, buzzing communities, encouraging businesses to protect pollinators, and as well a dedicated work package on rare species, so pollinators on the edge. We also have 4 work packages that are cross-cutting or provide an overview an overview of the plan. So these all integrate into these 6 core work packages. So we have mapping pollinator action across all sectors, monitoring the status of pollinators, research and providing that evidence base to all of our actions that we recommend, and raising awareness of pollinators and inspiring collective action. So I'm just going to do a quick whistle-stop tour of each of our work packages. I'll try to be as quick as possible, but starting with farmland. So a really exciting development in this work package is that building on work that was done during an EIP with farmers, a tool has been developed that has been co-designed with farmers. It's the Farmland Pollinator tool, and how it works is that farmers can self-assess how pollinator friendly their farms are. So they'll input measurements and metrics on how many meters or kilometers of hedgerow are managed in, say, a pollinator friendly way. So there's 4 categories and farmers will input metrics into each of these, and a score out of 100 will be calculated. And the evidence base that we've created during the Protecting Farmland Pollinators EIP suggests that 50 plus, so a score of 50 plus on a farm, shows that that farm supports pollinators. A score of 70 plus indicates that that farm is pollinator friendly. So in this work package, we're really hoping to continue supporting and engaging with farmers on their pollinator friendly journey and encourage uptake of this tool and use it as an engagement tool to encourage farmers to see what other actions they can take and actions they're already taking to support pollinators on their farm. And really, we want to celebrate the role that farmers are playing in this work package as well. I was very lucky to work with many of these farmers that are championing pollinator conservation in my previous research. So I'm really excited to be continuing this work that is being led by our farmland pollinator officers. Our next work package is the local authorities and public bodies. And this is an exciting work package in that we have all 42 county councils across the island as partners in the new plan. And in the new plan, we want to continue supporting them. With their increased capacity, we'll be creating resources as well as creating opportunities to bring these together and to create knowledge exchange opportunities. We also hope to engage with more public bodies, many of which will oversee significant areas of land and really have the potential to make a difference there. And for the first time, we're really excited to be bringing together transport authorities and utility companies. So we want to support them in the new plan to make their own networks pollinator friendly, but also to encourage them to make more links between networks and really link up these habitats and create these vital corridors for pollinators across the island. In the Buzzing Communities work package, and just to say actually that communities have been really amazing to date in supporting the pollinator plan, from schools to tidy towns groups, residents associations, local groups, and faith communities, and many more. They've been really, really amazing in the actions that they're taking and in increasing the total area of pollinator-friendly habitat and in awareness raising among their communities as well. So in the new plan, we want to really do more to support them and continue supporting them. We want to encourage new communities to join and also to connect communities to really help create those corridors and to create those links between pockets of nature every 200 metres. In our Encouraging Businesses to Protect Pollinators work package, we want to continue on our work in encouraging businesses to become more pollinator friendly. Currently, we have about 400 companies signed up as business supporters of the plan. And these businesses or companies carry out evidence-based actions on their site or through their governance, communication, or sponsorship activities. So in this work package and over the next 5 years, we want to get lots more companies involved. We want to host more knowledge exchange events and activities between these businesses so they can learn from each other. And we hope to get more companies and hopefully those bigger companies helping to amplify our message through their value chains. We also have the Pollinators on the Edge work package. So in this work package, we aim to conduct annual monitoring of our rare and most threatened species of pollinators and conduct hotspot mapping. So this is where we can really target efforts in monitoring and habitat restoration that will support rare species. We want to create more evidence-based guidelines for declining species to help empower people in restoring habitats and creating habitats for these rare species. And we aim to increase the area of pollinator-friendly land, nature reserves to support these threatened species. And just to say as well, we've had some exciting news in that Josh just last week had his first sighting of a critically endangered bee. So this cuckoo species of solitary bee, Nomada argentata, which was last seen 26 years ago. So onwards and upwards. So now we move into our cross-cutting module. So the first one is to map pollinator actions across all sectors. This is vital, and so we're really excited to say that we're developing this new portal for actions for pollinators that will be much more user-friendly and provide much more streamlined process for submitting your activities. So you'll be able to create these polygons. And where people create polygons that provide food, shelter, and safety for pollinators, it'll automatically create a corridor between those. So these are pockets of nature within 200 meters of each other, and an automatic corridor will be created between these. And it's hoped that this will provide encouragement for communities to reach out to each other and create these links. A really critical work package is, of course, monitoring the status of pollinators. So we need to have the data to know how pollinators are doing in a scientifically robust way. And we need these data to show whether or not pollinators are responding to the efforts of the pollinator plan. We hope, or we will be establishing a network of 60 sites. So these will be a fixed network of 60 sites that will be across farmland, semi-natural habitats, and urban parks. This will collect the crucial data that we need to monitor trends across pollinator groups, and will be supplemented as well by citizen science monitoring schemes like fit count data and the bumblebee monitoring scheme. The research work package is also really critical in that it provides the evidence base that we need for to recommend certain actions and to make sure that we're all doing the right thing. So Professor Jane Stout and other leading academics in the pollinator research set up the Irish Pollinator Research Network. And I've been very lucky to be a part of this network. And this network has gone from strength to strength, and we have institutions and representatives from all across the island of Ireland coming and meeting annually to share the research that they're conducting in the space of pollinator ecology and conservation. In the next phase of the plan, we want to encourage researchers and conduct research practice dialogue, so moving research into practice so it can really make a difference. We also want to communicate findings. So, for example, every time a paper is published that has relevance for Irish pollinators, we want to communicate these findings in an accessible language. So we want to have clear lay summaries on the website for everyone to be able to read and understand what we need to do and how best we can help pollinators. And just in the last phase alone, this network published 76 scientific papers relevant to Irish pollinator conservation. Finally, as has always been our mission, we want to continue raising awareness of pollinators and inspiring collective action. So in the next phase, we want to continue supporting the pollinators.ie website as a central hub of knowledge and resources. So we'll be continuing to update and develop this website so that people can find resources that are accessible and freely available. We will continue running campaigns such as #NoMoMay and Let It Bloom June, as well as some new ones that we are thinking about and will hopefully be able to tell you about soon. So we'll continue running these campaigns and continue updating and developing free accessible resources and advice for all sectors. We will continue communicating across work packages and within sectors. And an important emphasis we want to make in this next phase is we want to communicate the benefits of pollinator actions for wider biodiversity, for climate regulation, and for general human health and well-being. And just to say that we have 75 success metrics. So we have very clear outline of metrics that we will be reporting on annually so that everyone can make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So the next thing, and actually before I move on to the next section, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's supported the Pollinator Plan to date. I really do think we're making a difference together, but we do need more people to join our forces and to take more pollinator friendly actions. And there's a number of ways that people can get involved. You don't necessarily have to have a garden or even a plot of land or anything like that to make a difference and to get involved. But of course, if you do, this is great. And there's several actions that I'll outline in the next couple of slides that you can take on the ground to help support pollinators. So some of you might be totally new to all things pollinators or the Pollinator Plan, and you might be wondering where to start. And the first point I would direct you to would be our website, pollinators.ie. And if you go to the top tab and click resources, you'll find a bunch of different resources that are guidelines for certain sectors. You'll find an overview of the full plan, And you'll also find some how-to guides that will help you with actions like creating nesting habitats for bees or pollinators, and how to create or restore meadows in local areas. And I should say that all of these resources are free, they're accessible, and many of them are sector specific, so directly relevant to your context. Another really common question that people ask is, what should I plant? And the key thing here is just to emphasize that you don't actually need to plant anything. One of our slogans is don't mow, let it grow. And just by reducing the frequency of mowing, you can allow native wildflowers to return naturally to green spaces. And there's a few options. So you can look at restoring a short flowering meadow. So this would just be an area of grass that you cut every 6 weeks, starting from mid-April. Or you could have a long flowering meadow. This is only cut once a year in September. And it's a really important thing to say as well that many of these plants that we might consider weeds, like dandelions, these are often native wildflowers, and they provide loads of nectar and pollen for our pollinating insects. And I also personally find it quite entertaining to see when bees are getting absolutely caked in dandelion pollen. So do have a look out and think about how you look at weeds. Often you'll see pollinators visiting these because they are of such high value. And if you are managing an area of grass as a meadow, be it short or long flowering, don't be disheartened if you don't see flowers right away. It can take a little bit of time for the diversity of species to start showing up. So this is just a timeline of the wildflower meadow that is outside the data centre in Waterford. And it was only after about 6 years of this once a year cutting and lifting of cuttings that we saw the first orchid appearing. And if you'd like to learn more about this, there's a how-to guide on creating and restoring meadows in local communities and gardens available on our website, pollinators.ie. And it can be tempting to opt for wildflower seed mixes to try and boost the floral diversity in areas you're trying to manage as meadows. But there are a couple of issues with wildflower seed mixes in that sometimes the species included are not native. They may not have co-evolved with their wild pollinators, and so they may not provide long-lasting resources year to year that support pollinators. Sometimes as well, they can facilitate the spread of invasive species. So it's the Pollinator Plan stance that using wildflower seed mixes will not result in a species-rich grassland. And so it's our slogan, patience, not packets. So native trees and hedgerows are also lifelines for pollinators. They provide food, shelter, and importantly, corridors for pollinators as they travel across the landscape. So if you're lucky enough to have native species of trees like willow, blackthorn, wild cherry, and others, or a native flowering hedgerow on your site, then it's really important that you simply just protect these habitats because they're providing huge resources and support for a whole suite of biodiversity. So for example, one willow tree can support up to 266 insect species. So just by protecting that tree or that hedgerow, you are taking an action for pollinators. If you have hedgerows, we recommend cutting them on a 3-year rotation, of course, outside the bird breeding season. And we'd also recommend avoid cutting all of the hedges in the same year so that some are always flowering. So many species only flower on wood that is 2 or 3 years old. And if you are planting, do check out our resources on species we recommend. And hopefully you're noticing a trend in the actions that we're suggesting, in that it's often doing less is the best thing. And the same goes for pesticides. So pesticides, research has shown that pesticides can cause sublethal impacts on pollinators. So it's not always these mass die-offs that we might expect or think of when we hear pesticides. Usually the impacts are on a much more subtle and difficult to see scale. Pesticides can also reduce the availability of resources. And pesticides, you might be surprised to hear, include insecticides, but also herbicides and fungicides. Insecticides have been shown to impact learning, navigation, and growth and reproduction in pollinators. Herbicides, because they kill plants and can persist in the environment or spread from the place they were sprayed, they can reduce availability of flowering resources for pollinators. Fungicides have been shown to increase the toxicity of certain pesticides for pollinators, and they can disrupt the immune system as well and alter gut microbiomes of pollinators. So really our advice here is that pesticides should always be used sparingly and only when absolutely necessary, such as in the treatment of invasive species. And if you want to find more about invasive species, visit invasives.ie. Our colleagues have developed a suite of resources there for you to learn more about the invasive species you should be looking out for. If you are planting, we outline some useful ornamental species that provide pollen and nectar throughout the year for pollinators. So when you're picking species, try to pick species that are rich in nectar and pollen. Try to pick a number of species that flower at different times of the year, and opt for perennials and single blooms. And do take care to only plant ornamental or non-native species in garden or community spaces, and never plant these in the wider landscape. Really, in the wider landscape, restoration of semi-natural habitats should be the priority. So if you don't have a garden or an area of land, that's okay. There's still other ways to get involved in monitoring or in pollinator conservation in the plan. So you can get involved in pollinator monitoring in a few different ways. So one kind of entry-level activity you can get involved in is conducting flower insect timed counts. So you just have to count species as they visit a small patch of flowers, and you only have to count species by group. So you don't need any particular level of taxonomic skill. But should you be interested in training up on how to identify your bumblebees and butterflies and hoverflies, the National Biodiversity Data Centre has a learning portal that provides free training courses that you can complete in your own time to learn more about these species. There's also the All-Ireland Bumblebee Monitoring Scheme that you can get involved in, as well as several other monitoring schemes like the Irish Butterfly and Garden Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. You can also, if you're interested, just submit records of insects you see as you see them to our citizen science recording platform. And finally, another way you can support the plan is to help us communicate and spread the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan message. And there's many ways to spread the word. You can share resources. So for example, if you know someone in a faith community or in a local community or in a sports club or in a business or a farmer, you can share the resources that target the specific context that they're coming from. You can also take part in initiatives like No Mow May. And by taking part in these initiatives, maybe your neighbours might take an interest. So you can also post on social media and tag us in your posts to show us what you're doing. And you can follow us on social media and share our posts as well. Another method of getting in touch or spreading the word of the Pollinator Plan to your networks is to sign up to the Pollinator Plan newsletter and seeing if they would also like to sign up, or sharing the newsletter with them. So we have a monthly newsletter. We have a general one, and we also have one that targets businesses, and one that will be coming out shortly, a farmland newsletter. And finally, so there can be some challenges when you're taking actions for pollinators that may disrupt things or cause snags in the process. So I just provide some small tips to help you on your journey. So the first really is to get familiar with the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan advice. So sometimes if someone's asking you a question, it can be quite helpful to have that information on hand. So really empowering yourself with what our advice is and the reasons for our advice and the importance of these actions for pollinators can be really beneficial in these types of situations. I also think it's really important to listen and empathize with people, as people may have legitimate concerns or come from a place of wanting to understand. So it's always helpful to start from a listening point of view, and this will help shape the way. I also recommend, so for actions like creating long flowering meadows, sometimes there's times of the year where these meadows may look a bit untidy. And a useful way of communicating the importance of leaving these meadows at this time of year to set their seed can be having signage. So for example, this managed for wildlife sign, or you can also mow patterns into these areas or create borders that show this is an intentional action and this area is managed for pollinators and not being neglected. I also recommend sharing your stories with neighbours, maybe at community events or on social media. So share your good news stories. Tell people about the flowers and the pollinators that are appearing after you take an action, and tell them about what you get out of it. I think one thing that I've learned in this line of work is that enthusiasm is really contagious. So don't be afraid to show people how you're getting on. And I think probably one of the hardest things is patience. Be patient. Change takes time. It takes time to get people on board. And I totally understand the frustration with wanting to see changes quickly, because time is of the essence with pollinator conservation. But I do believe that we'll get there faster if we're all working together and supporting each other. So I appreciate there's a lot of advice there. So even if you come away with this with just one evidence-based action that seems feasible for you to do, that is still really, really valuable. And I just want to emphasize that we don't need everybody to be doing all of these actions perfectly. We just need more people to be doing something. And I have to say a massive thank you to everyone who's supported the plan so far. We've got really amazing farmers, gardeners, local councils, communities, businesses, and the steering group, past and present, who've supported the plan. And we're really excited about the ambitions of this next phase, which have been made possible through our funders in the Shared Island Initiative, the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, Northern Ireland Environment Agency, the Heritage Council, and National Parks and Wildlife Service. It really does take a village, and in the words of Dr. Una Fitzpatrick herself, if the last 10 years have taught us anything, it's that by working together, we can create a brighter future for nature and for ourselves. So thank you so much for listening. I believe we'll be having a live Q&A now.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Can I ask that you bring yourself back up on screen, please?
Of course, there I am.
Perfect. Thanks a million. Fantastic presentation. I think at the end, as you said, it's really sharing the work that people are doing. I think it's fantastic to see everything that's going on. So we did have a few questions submitted ahead of time. Hopefully a lot of those would have been answered throughout the presentation, but we'll try to get through some of them now, and there's been a lot of questions coming in as well. I just want to point out, if we don't have time to get through all these questions, you can reach out to Sarah or to the pollinators team with your questions at pollinators@biodiversityireland.ie. So just some of the questions that came in. Someone asked, how can we contribute to pollinator protection through policy when in many countries it takes years for policies to be approved?
Yeah, and this is a really important question. So I think the pollinator plan is an example of how we can mobilize support and actions for pollinators, even when there aren't necessarily specific policies in place targeting pollinators. I think, there hasn't always been the same support for pollinator conservation as we see nowadays. And it really started with these ground up initiatives, and, the researchers, the communities, the citizen scientists who have made this an issue that the public is now aware of. So it starts with creating, I guess, a framework that brings people together. And I think that is crucial. We need to have all sectors contributing to conservation efforts and building up from that. All our messaging is evidence-based and positive. So there's no actions that are kind of too small to make a difference. And I think that's an important part of this, is that everyone can get involved, even if you're just doing something small, if you're letting just a few dandelions grow or quit spraying your herbicides or something like that. So I think, to answer the question, it can take years, and that is frustrating, and I totally appreciate that. But we can do something in the meantime, I suppose, while waiting for those policies to reflect that.
Yeah. Perfect. And actually, just about kind of getting stuck in, there's been a few questions around funding. So, are there any funding available for companies who want to set up biodiversity areas or company grounds? And there's also been questions about universities and potential funding as well.
Yeah, so I can't speak to funding opportunities, but I should emphasize that many of our actions they're low cost, so they actually require doing less rather than doing more and getting new things in. So, for example, to maintain a long flowering meadow is a really good example of a low cost action that just requires cutting that area of grass once a year and lifting those cuttings. So a lot of our actions they're low cost and often is the case is that they're low effort as well. So you may not need specific funding for these particular actions. There are organizations I believe you can reach out to for advice. I'm not sure about funding opportunities, but for sure you can reach out to organizations like Business for Biodiversity Ireland who can support businesses on their pollinator friendly journey.
Perfect. And if you are coming from a business and if you do have more questions, you can reach out to Sarah Kelly as well,
Yeah,
who is, what's her official title? She works with the businesses.
yeah, Business and Biodiversity Officer.
Business and Biodiversity Officer. So she might have more information on the various funding if it's available as well for any businesses. I've seen as well, Sarah, we've had a few questions come in about, I suppose, the link with Northern Ireland. And are you linked to the UK Pollinator Plan? Someone's carrying out pan trap surveys in Northern Ireland, and we've had a few other questions, I suppose, about what on the ground, what engagement is like in Northern Ireland compared to the Republic.
So I can't speak to that hugely, but I do believe there is huge engagement across both jurisdictions, and we're making efforts to make sure our monitoring efforts are coordinated across the whole island of Ireland.
Perfect. So there was a question here about the data. So I suppose about openly sharing your research data. How does your data set compare to other pollination data sets around Europe? Just before I hand that over to you, Sarah, just say that we are the node for GBIF. So that's the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, I believe. So we do share the data on an international scale. We actually have a webinar from last year for our digital services. So Michelle Judge and Oisin Duffy would have given a presentation that actually goes through how our data is validated, how it's shared, and how then it is passed along to different streams. So I suppose just if you're interested, you can go back and watch that webinar. But I suppose for yourself, Sarah, would you have any information on kind of how these data sets are compared across different countries?
Yeah, so I think that the difficulty with insect monitoring and monitoring in general is that in order to be able to pool data sets, you need to be comparing like for like. So they need to have been collected in the same way at maybe similar numbers of sites. So to say it simply, you need to be comparing apples with apples rather than apples and oranges. And I suppose one of the tricky things is data collected through research can often be collected in lots of different ways. So it's not necessarily something we could immediately pool with, say, our national Irish monitoring pollinator scheme. However, as part of the Irish Pollinator Research Network, when we complete papers or research, we are working towards having all of those data sets then transferred over to the National Biodiversity Data Centre. Often is the case that these are already freely available. If the paper is public access, then the data is freely available. But it's a tricky process, but one we're working towards.
Perfect. And just say as well, our colleague Michelle Larkin is the National Pollinator Monitoring Scheme Officer. So we do oversee or we do collect data from a large number of sites as well. But I think that's slightly separate to what the pollinator plan does.
So it's actually under the nature restoration regulation that all EU countries are required to conduct this monitoring. And so that is what I mentioned when I said we're creating this fixed network of 60 sites where we'll be conducting this standardized monitoring. So all EU countries will be required to do this because of they've recognized the importance of collecting data that is comparable. So hopefully these data will create these or help us get insight into the trends across Europe.
Perfect. I know there's another question on data about analysing the data, and that is a big part of it as well. So how will we go about analysing that data? I think that's a long-term plan or medium to long-term plan.
Yeah, for sure. And it takes a long time to collect the data, but the Biodiversity Data Centre, they have a great team in place to crunch those numbers. So with the schemes like the butterfly monitoring scheme and the bumblebee monitoring scheme, there are annual reports that kind of sum up the data that's been collected so far, so you can keep tabs that way as well.
Right. So just another question. Are there any actions being taken to keep weeds such as the common ragwort in public parks because they're so important for pollinators? This comment says, as I know they are meant to be taken due to the Noxious Weed Act. I saw the council taking them the other day. They're full of bees and moths. So just wondering, is there any kind of, would we have any recommendation around this?
Yeah, so I suppose it's are they to really think about if they are required to be removed. And of course, there's like certain contexts, like in agriculture, where they do pose a health risk to livestock. But if they're in a place where they're not posing any risk, then potentially this is something that can be allowed to flower. Ragworts, they're pollinators absolutely love them. If you've ever seen a ragwort plant, you'll see them absolutely covered in bees and hoverflies and all sorts. So where they can be left, we would recommend please do leave them. But it's a tricky one because it is supposed to be managed as a noxious weed in farmland. So it's a tricky one is the answer.
Yeah. So I've just noticed that we've come up to 1 o'clock, so that's the end of the webinar. If we didn't get to your question, please feel free to email us and we'll be able to get back to you. Just to say as well, there was a few questions coming in about, kind of what plants you can plant or, how to garden around invasive species. We do have a webinar on tips for gardening with invasive species, so like what alternative plants you can plant in your garden, and we do have a number of resources as well, as we mentioned, on pollinators.ie. So that kind of brings us up to 1 o'clock now. I just want to say again, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you so much, Sarah, for a fantastic presentation. I just wish you all a lovely remainder of your day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.